Okay, let's unpack this. How did one 16th century Italian architect working in, a pretty small provincial town, how did he manage to change the visual language of the entire world?
We're talking about defining what authority and elegance look like for the next, 400 years. We are diving deep today into the source material around Andrea Palladio, and if you have ever stood before a courthouse, a national monument, or even a grand country estate, you have definitely encountered Palladianism. It's the style named after him. And our mission here is to shortcut you straight to the essentials: how he codified classical beauty, why his designs feel so inherently calming, and how the blueprints traveled all the way from Vicenza, Italy to Virginia in the USA. Our sources take us right to the heart of his practice, to a city about 60 kilometers west of Venice called Vicenza,
Right.
in the Veneto region.
Exactly. And this whole prosperous area is, well, it's basically a permanent open-air museum of his work. It was all commissioned by these grand agricultural families who rose to wealth back in the 16th century. We're tracking the life of a humble miller's son who somehow ascended to define architectural harmony.
And that word harmony is really where we have to start. It's the immediate key to his appeal.
Yeah.
See, Palladio wasn't just, building structures. He was crafting experiences based on mathematical order.
Okay.
His work is all about this concept of harmonious proportions. It delivers an almost therapeutic, benevolent calm to the viewer. This is design that is literally intended to impose order on a chaotic world. And it's pretty fitting we're doing this deep dive now. Palladio was born in Padua 5 centuries ago, and that anniversary was celebrated by a massive exhibition, La Grande Mostra, which was housed in one of his most celebrated buildings, the Palazzo Barban da Porto in Vicenza.
So the exhibition was in one of his own buildings.
It was, which just emphasizes that his legacy isn't theory. It's tangible, it's local, and it's incredibly enduring.
So let's start with that origin story. Because the gap between his birth and his global influence is it's staggering. He was born in Padua, his father was a miller, and they moved to Vicenza. And he starts his career not as some grand visionary, but as an apprentice to a stonemason. So how does a local artisan, skilled in carving fireplaces and column details, suddenly become history's most influential Renaissance architect?
It's a fantastic example of talent meeting very deliberate, very focused patronage.
So it wasn't just luck.
Not at all. I mean, Palladio certainly had the natural skill. The sources emphasize his excellence in carving decorative stonework, the details on columns, on doorways.
But that's still a huge leap.
It is. His true critical break came when he met the wealthy landowner and a really formidable scholar named Gian Giorgio Trissino.
Trissino. Okay, so he's the one who essentially rescued him from the stonemason's yard.
More than rescued him, he completely rebranded him. Trissino saw this raw intelligence, this potential. He didn't just offer money. He took over Palladio's entire education. He even gave him the classical name, Palladio, which is derived from Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom. It was a signal of his new intellectual standing.
Wow. So what did that private education actually look like? What was the curriculum for an aspiring architect in the 1540s?
Well, Trissino's curriculum was a deep dive into antiquity. It was centered on multiple trips to Rome.
Right.
And this wasn't, a sightseeing tour. Palladio was tasked with meticulous measurement and study. He immersed himself in the masterpieces of classical Roman and Greek architecture, mapping out temples, public baths. But just as importantly, he studied the Renaissance masters, who were already reviving classicism, people like Donato Bramante and Raphael.
So he was synthesizing the ancient past with the most sophisticated thinking of his own time.
Precisely. And here's the crucial context. This kind of social mobility was only possible because of the economic boom in the Veneto. You had these agricultural entrepreneurs, a new wealthy class.
And they needed to show off their new status.
They needed architecture that conveyed legitimacy. They were hungry for buildings that linked their new money to the moral authority of ancient Rome. And Palladio, with his unique classical training, was the only local guy who could deliver it.
That makes perfect sense. He had the high-status pedigree from Trissino, working for clients who wanted that same high status. Okay, so let's move from the history to the technical side. What exactly are the rules that define the Palladian style? How do we decode it?
That brings us to the visual identifiers. If you look at, say, the Palazzo Barban da Porto, you see a bold facade that clearly signals power, permanence. It manages the visual transition for the ground up really expertly.
And I see that mix of textures you were talking about.
Yes. The ground floor is often defined by what's called rustication.
Rustication.
It's that rough, heavy, deliberately irregular stonework. It gives the building a feeling of, primal strength. a fortress. But then above that, you have the polished, elegant columns rising up. It symbolizes civilization, refinement. It's a visual dialogue between nature and intellect.
And what about the details, like on the windows? I've noticed something there.
A signature trademark. You'll often find, particularly on the second or third stories, a certain rhythm in the window pediments.
The little roof-like things above the window?
Exactly, the triangular or curved structure. They alternate. One window might have a strong, pointed triangular pediment, and the next will have a soft, curved one.
So it's not just a repeated pattern, it has variety.
Right, it prevents the rigid classicism from becoming boring. It introduces rhythm, visual interest. But the truly revolutionary element, the core principle he applied everywhere, is the use of temple architecture.
Temple architecture.
He took the facade of a sacred structure, a Roman temple, and applied it to a secular home or a civic building.
Wait a minute, so he was putting the face of a god's house onto a rich farmer's house. That seems incredibly audacious. Wasn't that controversial?
It was absolutely radical, but it was incredibly effective for his patrons. By placing a strong, pointed pediment, supported by colossal columns, approached by wide steps, all features of a temple.
He was elevating the owner.
Instantly. It implied the family wasn't just wealthy, but morally authoritative. It visually linked them to the revered institutions of the Roman Republic. It was a projection of virtue in stone.
That's a powerful idea. And the feeling of calm you mentioned, how is that achieved? Is it just symmetry?
No, it's mathematical. And here's where it gets really interesting. Palladio believed deeply in the Renaissance idea of a universal order. So he applied simple, rigorous mathematical ratios to every single room, every courtyard, every facade.
Ratios like what?
I think 1.1 the square, or 2.3 or 3.5. These ratios were actually derived from ancient Greek music theory, the same principles that create pleasing musical harmonies. By linking sight and sound through these simple whole number relationships, he made sure the rooms felt inherently correct before they were even decorated.
So the interior experience is defined by these proportions.
Exactly. The atrium leads to a dramatic but never busy interior. The design is simple, clear, not overcrowded.
Yeah.
And that, combined with the strict ratios, creates that feeling of psychological order. True therapeutic architecture.
And that structural rigor, it carried him beyond Vicenza's mansions and into the biggest city in the region, Venice. Let's talk about his work there, because that's where we see the seeds of his global spread. His most admired works in Venice are undoubtedly the churches of San Giorgio Maggiore and the Redentor, and they're so easy to appreciate because they're kind of isolated. You can view their perfect classical facades from across the water, silhouetted against the lagoon. They offer this moment of classical stillness in the exuberant chaos of Venice.
And while those are celebrated, his career also gives us these fascinating glimpses of his unbuilt visions. Palladio was constantly trying to inject his classical purity into Venice's complexity.
Like what?
Well, he tried his hand at infrastructure. He submitted a design for the Rialto Bridge.
The actual Rialto
The
Bridge.
very one. He offered a massive structure decorated with the pediment and columns of a temple. It was, perhaps thankfully for Venetian traffic, rejected.
A temple bridge. Okay, he certainly never wavered from his core design philosophy.
Never. And his most important unbuilt design came after a disastrous fire damaged the Ducal Palace. Palladio offered this massive alternative design for the reconstruction, and while it wasn't chosen, it's immensely significant.
Why is that?
Because that alternative design bears an uncanny resemblance to the banqueting house in Whitehall in London.
No way.
Yes, and that's because the banqueting house was designed by Inigo Jones, and Jones was Palladio's first foreign, non-Italian disciple. This is the moment, the precise moment the Palladian gospel starts moving north.
Okay, so the journey from Vicenza to London and then to America is fascinating. Let's trace that lineage now. It starts with Inigo Jones, who was, by all accounts, completely obsessed. He visits Italy in 1614, and he doesn't just sketch. The sources say he literally bought a large trunk and filled it with the master's original architectural drawings, the blueprints.
He wasn't just acquiring inspiration, he was acquiring the proprietary system. And those physical drawings, they became the foundation of British neoclassical architecture. They passed through the hands of influential patrons, the Dukes of Burlington and Devonshire, who used them to fuel the British Palladian movement. And they finally settled at the Royal Institute of British Architects in 1894.
So the drawings themselves created a direct lineage in Britain, but Palladianism became a global phenomenon. I mean, it influenced St. Petersburg, America. You can't put a whole style in a trunk and sail across the Atlantic. So how do the ideas spread so universally?
That's where the written word comes in. The primary vehicle for his international reputation was his illustrated text, Quattro Libri dell'Architettura, the 4 books of architecture.
Published in 1570.
Right. And this book, filled with clear drawings, detailed explanations, and those precise mathematical ratios we talked about, it became the definitive architectural manual of the Enlightenment.